Alrighty, guys, here we go. Just giving you guys the voiced over version of the 8-week macros nutrition challenge lecture part 2. Okay, so in this lecture, really what we're doing is kind of going over what we already learned, what we know, and then kind of where we're headed and what we're trying, or sorry, not what we're trying, what we should do if we need to troubleshoot or we're not getting the result that we want, right? So really, most of the bulk of this lecture has to do with troubleshooting and manipulating your diet template and your macros in order to make it suit whatever goal you want, right? And so remember, like I said at the very onset of all of this, when you understand how to manipulate the template and you understand how to change the numbers around, the whole thing becomes a lot easier because it becomes clear that you can manipulate your template to make your body weight go up or down, or you could keep the calories the same and manipulate the macros and see what that does with your body composition and all those kinds of things, right? So the first thing first, congrats. We made it. We finished 8 weeks. Well, if you're listening to this now, it's probably been over 8 weeks since you finished. But we made it. So congratulations to everyone who participated in this. And like I said at the onset, congratulations, by the onset, I mean in lecture 1, which is congratulations for taking control of your situation and making a decision to invest in yourself, and your health and your future self will definitely thank you for the information that you've learned and internalized over the last few weeks, okay? So what did we learn? Firstly, we learned how to manipulate our diet and how to use nutritional science to help us prepare and be consistent. We also learned portions, food portions, meal timing, and when to eat those perfectly proportioned meals as it relates to when you're working out and when you're not working out, right? And the last thing we kind of hopefully we got out of this is that nutrition doesn't need to be as complicated as many people want you to think it is, right? Remember that the more complicated you think nutrition is, the more overwhelmed you're going to feel about it, and the less likely you will be to do anything about it, right? So really one of the biggest keys here is to remember that nutritional science is in fact very easy science, and once you kind of understand how it works, using it to manipulate your diet becomes really not that challenging, okay? So where to next on our journey? And the answer is, I don't know. That's kind of up to you, right? But let's hope this isn't the end of your nutrition journey, right? This is really, like I've said to many people, is 8 weeks to the rest of your life, right? The principles that we've learned in the 8-week nutrition challenge really hold true for everything about nutrition. And therefore, the possibilities for your nutritional goals and how you manipulate and what you choose to do with it are endless, right? You can choose to stay the same. You can choose to go up in weight. You can choose to go down in weight. You can choose to manipulate it and just kind of fiddle with it just to see what happens because you're interested in that, right? But like I said before, all nutrition goals are attainable with the skills you've learned and acquired over the last 8 weeks or more, okay? So let's take a second and think back to the quote-unquote pyramid of dietary importance, right? And, remember that it was never actually a pyramid, but it was really just kind of my surmise of the hierarchy of, the important things we need to keep track of when we're talking about diet and how those all fall into relation with each other, right? So if you think back, right, the base of the pyramid, we have calories in versus calories out. And then kind of sitting above that is our macronutrient ratio, so the ratio of proteins, fats, and carbs to total calories, right? And then we have our portion sizing, so that's how we split up those macronutrients, how much fat, how much protein, how many carbs we have in all the meals we're eating. And then lastly, the last part of that pyramid is the meal timing. So when we're eating those meals that we've portioned out with our macros, right? And so that's the hierarchy of dietary importance, or the pyramid, or whatever you want to call it. The lack of graphic that we all think is funny, right? Anyways, it still applies, and the pyramid will always apply, right? Which is, if you want to be in a caloric deficit to lose weight, you got to be burning more calories than you're eating. And if you want to be in a caloric surplus, you got to be ingesting more calories than you're burning, right? And all the rest of it too. In terms of the macros, the meal timing, and the portions, they all still apply, regardless of what your goals tend to be. You can still use all of that stuff to help you achieve your goals. Okay. On to really probably the most important part of this lecture, which is what to do when you're not getting the result that you want, right? Some of you guys obviously talked with me about the issues you were having, and we troubleshooted together, and I helped you manipulate the template a little bit to get you going in the direction you wanted to go. But like I said before, remember, the pyramid of dietary importance will always hold strong regardless of if you are having trouble achieving your goals or not, okay? I understand that it can be very discouraging when you're not getting the result that you want, especially when you've been putting in a lot of work. So remember, you got to stay on track and be consistent, and really, really try and be honest with yourself and own your successes and failures, because ultimately, as I've said at the very beginning of this whole endeavor, placing blame elsewhere other than on yourself usually won't get you the result you want anyway, right? It's just going to lead you down the path of not owning your shit. You got to own your shit if you want to have great results, right? Right? So, but we want to be people who own our stuff. We own our shit. And we own all of our successes, and we own all of our failures, regardless of whether or not we want to or not, right? We'd rather be those kind of people. At least I would anyway. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. So you're not moving in the direction that you want to go. What do you do? So I understand, especially for the people losing weight, that usually the first initial idea or thought is, if you're not losing weight, just cut calories. Cut calories, cut calories, cut calories, right? Let's cut out carbs, whatever it is. It doesn't seem to matter as long as we're cutting. I was at 1,600 and I wasn't losing any weight, so I'm going to cut to 1,200 and now I'm going to lose weight, right? Like, that's usually people's mentality, but remember, we're not on a starvation diet, right? Like, this is, at no point in time was this ever intended to be a diet where you like completely restrict yourself and you feel hungry all the time, or maybe you still feel hungry all the time, but you're still eating a good amount of food, right? And any of those kinds of things. We place balance and health above any of the other things in terms of losing weight or gaining weight, changing your body composition, etc., right? So keep that in mind when you think about your initial desire to just slash calories, right? I always tell people that, especially if it, if you're trying to gain weight, probably the first thing you want to do if you're not gaining weight is add calories, right? So just at overall bulk, start adding calories to your template. But if you're trying to lose weight and you're not, avoid that temptation to just slash your calories, right? I would always tell people, and any of the people who got any kind of diet manipulation from me will have noticed that right away the very, very first change we would have made was to your macros, not even to the overall calories in, the caloric content of what you're eating, right? Like, if you were at 30% protein, 40% carbs, 30% fat, probably the first initial change you made, or I made for you, was to bring you to 30% protein, 37% carbs, 33% fat, right? And your calories would have stayed almost the same, and you just would have seen a very minimal change in how many calories and how many carbs you eat and how much fat you eat in a day, right? Um, Also, keep in mind, if you start slashing calories and just like arbitrarily cutting out calories, cutting out carbs, cutting out food, over the course of time, you got to understand what this is telling your body, which is like you're telling your body that there is a deficit of food, okay? And your body is both smart and lazy in as much as your body knows when it's not being fed enough food to sustain itself and therefore will slow its metabolism down in order to help accommodate this, right? So you won't burn as many calories if you're always in a deficit. If you're, like constantly over the long term, right? Chronically, if you want to call it that, in a chronic caloric deficit, usually what happens to those people is their metabolism is very slow. They're probably not losing the weight they want to lose. And also, I would go out and say one thing further and say, which is that their body composition probably isn't very good or where they want it to be either, right? Um, and that's simply because they've literally just told their body that their body's always being starved and it should and therefore it should just be, try and burn as few calories in a day as possible, right? Um, so on to part three, right? I already mentioned some of this. Um, like I said before, right? If you're not reducing, increasing calories, then the first adjustment that that I would make at least is to your carb and fat ratios. You start with like a 2 or a 3% swing. Um, and also remember, guys, that uh, you shouldn't just like base this off of like a couple days worth of eating, right? It's best to make a change to the template, the overall ratio, and bring it to, like or track it for 2 weeks and see what it does for you. You might get a body comp change, but you might not get a body weight change. You might get a body weight change and a body comp change. Who knows, right? I mean, I had one person who literally all like didn't lose any weight for 8 weeks. We switched up her macros a little bit, so I think we did like a 5% swing to fat. So we went to 30% protein, 35% carbs, 35% fat, and I had her drink a liter of water immediately in the morning, and that took her from losing no weight over 8 weeks to losing 5-6 pounds in the subsequent two weeks after that, right? And so that's how profound a small little change like a 2 or a 3 or a 5% swing from carbs to fat can have on your overall result. And keep in mind, that was no cutting of calories. That was just changing the macros, right? So like I said, like I've said many times, we would rather eat more food and get the result that we want as opposed to eating not enough food and still not getting the result we want, right? So on to part four. So we tracked for 2 weeks and we're still not getting the result that we want, right? We made an adjustment and we're still not getting the result that we want. In that case, if you're getting, you're getting the adjustments and you're still not seeing the result that you want, then probably it's time to start cutting out calories, or in some cases maybe adding calories, right? Highly unlikely though that most of the time you just add calories right off the onset if you're trying to gain. But I said that already. So probably, if we haven't gone to that drastic, more drastic, it's really not that drastic, the 30% protein, 35% carbs, 35% fat macro ratios, then we'll probably start cutting calories. Again, like I've said before, remember, this is not a starvation diet, right? Like at no point in time should you be like having 1,000 calories a day or even 1,200 calories. If you exercise every single, 4 to 5 or 6 times a week, and you do cardio and you lift weights, you do CrossFit, whatever it is, like you shouldn't be eating 1,200 calories a day unless you weigh like 80 pounds. Right? Like you have to acknowledge that that is not enough food for you to sustain yourself. Like, I mean, 1,200 calories can easily be eaten in one meal if you have enough fat in it. Like, so, really what that's telling me is that if you're eating 1,200 calories and you're not getting the result that you want, it means your metabolism is pretty bad, right? And you got to address that before you address anything else. And so again, I mean, it's always a challenge when people aren't getting the result that they want, because it's very frustrating. And as the coach, I feel for that, because, I want everyone to have success. And so, we can all get caught up in that desire to just start cutting calories, slash calories, slash calories, cut it out, slow our metabolism down, slow our metabolism down. But remember, I've said this one before too, which is that ultimately this isn't like it's 8 weeks to the rest of your life, not 8 weeks to lose 50 pounds, right? Like, we're not in this for a short-term game. We're in this to learn how to manipulate our diet, understand nutritional science better, and understand that it can be, in fact, easy to manipulate. And when we understand and know the science, and we don't have to feel overwhelmed with it. And over the course of the long term, you will probably find that, you know, if you did a nutritional template such as the one you did, and you did it for a full year, and you checked your progress pictures from like the first day you started, and like 365 days later, and see where you're at, and then also gauge where your performance is at, you probably find that, over the course of the long term, um, this is a very, 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 one, sustainable, and two, successful methodology of tracking calories, macros, and how to split them up and use it to make your body composition whatever it is that you want it to be, right? Um, so, troubleshooting part 5. Um, so, yay, we made some changes to our template a little bit, and now we're finally going in the direction we want. That's good, right? Like, hooray. Um, Stay consistent though, right? It's easy to like people often, well, people are people, right? So we kind of work in this like reward system where it's like, oh, I ate really good for like the entire week, so I'm gonna whatever on the weekend. Um, and so like I get it, cheating is fine. We talked about that. You are always allowed to cheat, right? But as I've also said, the more consistent you are, the better the result you're going to have across the boards for anything you do in anything in your life, right? So, um, staying as consistent as you can over the long term with your numbers and with the template, especially when it's going in the way that you want it to go, is going to help you get the result you want, and it's also going to help you. It's going to help you mentally understand that you can make the change and it's possible, and even a little change is good, right? Um, Also note, I would not suggest cutting yourself below 20% carbohydrates, and like I said earlier, below 1,200 calories ever. Um, uh, you know, there's lots of different diet types out there. Certainly everybody is welcome to experiment with all of them. Okay. However, this is what we're doing, and there are things like the ketogenic diet and whatever other diets that exist. Okay. And they do work, absolutely. All of them work, assuming you do them consistently, right? Um, but in my opinion, we're trying to achieve balance, and realistically, in order to be in balance with everything, I really find it hard to believe that not eating any kind of carbohydrates, or even really having below 20% carbohydrates in your diet, especially for a person who's physically active and doing like CrossFit or lifting heavy weights and cardio stuff every day, um, you really got to be considering having carbohydrates in order to replenish your glycogen and give you energy, right? Um, yeah. So the last couple things we're going to talk about here is our return to base. Okay. Um, so when I say your base is kind of like, your base would be like that initial recommendation you got, or at least it's a recommendation in which when you're eating that amount of food, you're not gaining, you're not losing, you're staying the same, right? And so that's what we call base. And at some point in time, even if you're trying to lose weight, you really want to think about heading back to your base, right? Getting, increasing your calories and eating a bit more food in order to not slow your metabolism down, right? Like, remember what I said in a couple of slides ago, which was really that um, when you're constantly in that chronic calorie deficit over the long term, you're going to end up slowing your metabolism down a lot, and then it's going to take um, a very long time, and it's going to be challenging and extremely frustrating to bring your metabolism back up again, right? So for that reason, I would say probably in your best interest um, to not try not to be in the calorie deficit for more than 12 to 13, 14 weeks at a time, right? Like probably three or four solid months um, in that calorie deficit range is really the maximum time you should think about being there before you want to start heading back to a place where you're not losing weight anymore, right? Um, so once you've reached your goal weight or you've exhausted your weight loss for 12 weeks, you would return to base. Um, and then you'd probably want to stick there for a couple months, right? Like be on base for like 4 to 8 weeks again. And then maybe you want to make another change. Maybe you lost a bunch of weight and your strength went down, so now you're going to try and gain weight or whatever it is, right? But before you start fiddling again and you really like go back to base, sit in a place where you're not gaining weight, you're not losing weight, you're just kind of staying the same, being consistent, and then once you figure out what your next goal is and where you want to head with your nutrition or your performance or whatever it is you're doing, then you can start manipulating your template and making the changes as needed, right? Um, So, right, like I said here, I get a little ahead of myself, but um, right, like I said, staying on base for at least a month to 8 weeks before you start making changes again, and all of this comes down to science, right? Like none of this isn't pulled out of the air, right? Like none of this got pulled out of my ass. Um, all of this is based on nutritional science and kind of how your body works and how your body responds to being in a deficit or in a surplus of calories, and the ratios of those calories, et cetera, right? And so, like I said before, in that constant or that chronic deficit range, will always tell your body that you're starving, and over the course of time, it will try and reduce its caloric expenditure when it's doing nothing, right? So that base metabolic rate will over the time always tend to go down if you're always trying to lose weight, which ultimately is bad because we want to eat more food, straight up. Um, Lastly, remember this style of diet and calorie or macro manipulation can be used forever. Okay, I've said that a few times now. It's 8 weeks to the rest of your life, and you can literally change the template, fiddle with the macros, um, and so on and so forth forever and ever and ever. To get whatever results you want, right? I mean, obviously, like if you're trying to gain 20 pounds and you're trying to eat, gain 20 pounds of like muscle mass, it might take you like 10 years, or maybe not 10 years, but like a couple years or something like that, right? Um, drastic changes on a template like this probably aren't going to be too easy to do, but ultimately, like I've said before, drastic changes aren't sustainable, and we want sustainable change that can be done forever, and ultimately, that's kind of where we're at, right? Um, Personally, I've been eating in this manner for a year now. Like literally a year, I have never changed what I do about my nutrition. It's consistent. Uh, you know, every week I'm eating the same kind of ratios. My body comp is pretty similar, and my body weight is pretty similar. I mean, I don't even need to look at the scale at this point to know that if I'm eating the same foods and I'm eating the same quantities of food over the course of weeks and months, that realistically, um, I'll probably, I could not weigh myself for a month and come back to the scale and find that I might be, I'll probably be within a plus or minus 1 pound of where I think I should be relative to what I've been doing, right? And so, yeah, keep that in mind. Let's keep this going forever, guys, because it will definitely help your overall performance, body composition, health, sleeping, et cetera, forever. Okay? And you spend all this time over the 8 weeks learning this stuff and practicing it to lose it now and to quit on it now would be kind of a waste, right? At least that's my opinion anyway. So last thing I'll say there is thank you so much for participating and for submitting pictures. If you submitted pictures, it was highly appreciated. Um, Everybody should be proud of themselves for taking on this challenge and taking on um, something that's outside your comfort zone and makes you feel uncomfortable, because that's really where the best kind of changes come from, right? Um, and also, even if you didn't make like these mega like 40-pound changes that like you thought maybe you should make, um, you should be really proud of yourself for making huge strides forward in your habits, your nutrition habits, um, understanding how to eat better. If you have children and things like that, the influence that you will have on your children's life by changing how you eat and changing how you portion food and all those kinds of things, right? So the effects of this kind of template diet program that we embarked on go much deeper than just the simple did I lose weight? Did my body composition change, right? Do you feel better every day? Do you sleep better? Do you drink more water? Are you a better influence on your children? Do you make better dietary decisions when you go and grocery shop or when you're out for dinner? All of these kinds of things are mega wins that, you can't always see them on the scale or in the mirror, but are probably honestly more important for you and your life than any of the changes you make on the scale. At least that's what I think. Anyway, so be proud of yourselves. Remember, 8 weeks to the rest of your life. Please don't just quit on it now. And if you have any questions, you need any help, and you want to get some kind of manipulation with your diet, then shoot me a personal message. I'd be happy to chat with you, and we can figure out what it is that you need to have done to your dietary template and to get you going in the direction you want. All right? So thank you guys so much for participating and listening to this lecture. You're all amazing. Have a good day. Bye.